Okay. Uh, Welcome all and welcome to the 13th webinar of INCOSE India. And today we came with a new topic. But before we start with our regular webinar session, I would like to give you a brief overview about INCOSE and the activities what we are doing in INCOSE India. So this is our 10th year and this is the 13th webinar as I said, and you can see the people who are contributing into the INCOSE India chapter. There are a lot many people who are not visible in this picture, but we get lot many support and contributions from many people. So INCOSE is basically a non-profitable organization and which is having 18,000 plus members, uh, and there are 53 technical working groups. So there are 74 chapters across 35 countries and approximately 3,700 plus certified professional, which are also including 120 plus CAB organizations. Uh, Regarding INCOSE India, we have charters as INCOSE South Chapter in 2010 and mainly active into three cities, Hyderabad, Bangalore and Pune. There are over 160 individual members in India chapter and over 180 CAB associate members. Uh, we have 61 certified ACPs, out of which 2 are ESEPs and 17 ASEPs and 42 are CSEPs. So these are basically certification levels, which anyways, Rene is going to tell us more about it today. And we have three local technical working groups, which are architecture, MBS, and PHM. These are mainly active working groups in COSE India chapter, and there are a lot many working groups which are active at world level. So as I mentioned earlier, we started in India in 2010, and this is our 10th year what we are celebrating. And we got nominated for a lot many awards, and we got awarded with Silver Circle Award from 2015 to 2018, and first time we got a Gold Circle Award in 2019, and 2020 June we received a most improved performance in 1 year for the India chapter. So this way we are progressing and heading into the uh, India. Uh, so as I mentioned earlier, this is the 10th year of celebration of INCOSE India chapter. Unfortunately, it aligned with COVID, and we had lot many programs earlier in mind, uh, but because of the COVID situation, uh, we were able to conduct only virtual of them. So webinar series is among of this, and uh, let's see if we get any opportunity of having face-to-face celebration, possibly this year or the next year. Will be we would like to have that celebration. Uh, Apart from this, we are conducting a lot many webinar sessions, which are also lined up, uh, and those would be communicated accordingly uh, to all the people. Uh, uh, Knowing about INCOSE, now just brief information about today's topic. So today our speaker is René King, and she is managing director of CTI, which is Certification Training International, and she is going to help us to understand what are the INCOSE knowledge exams and how to utilize the system engineering handbook provided by INCOSE. So uh, before we start, I'm going to request you all to please keep on mute. And if there are any queries, please put those queries into the chat sections, and we are going to address those queries at the end of the session. Uh, yeah, saying that, Renee, please take over.
Thank you so much, Kalpesh. It says that I can't start sharing while you're sharing, and so if you could just stop sharing and then I'll take over.
Yeah, can you see?
No, not yet. So I think, okay, yeah, it should be able to work now.
Great.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for that introduction, and it's really good to be here today. I'm a big fan of India in general, having been there twice in my life, and INCOSE India and the amazing things that the chapter does. So thank you so much for your time. So I've titled this webinar, Getting SEP Certified and Making the Most of It, because I feel like people understand that getting SEP certified is a good thing, but don't necessarily understand the value that it can bring in different areas and how one can translate that value into the workplace. So we'll be discussing some of that today. And now just a little bit of an obligatory copyright notice. These slides will be made available to you afterwards, so just a little bit about what you can and can't do with them. So a little bit of an agenda. I'll be introducing Certification Training International and what we do, then talking about certification in the larger scheme of things, and then the INCOSE Knowledge Exam, which is a big part of getting certified for the ASEP level and for the CSEP level. And to just introduce you to the October workshop that will be taking place from the 12th to the 16th of October. This webinar today is supposed to be informative, to give you some background knowledge about the certification and the knowledge exam, but also to promote that workshop that will be held in order to help accelerate your knowledge on the handbook so that you can pass the knowledge exam on your first attempt. So we'll be speaking about that, and then of course some Q&A at the end. And please feel free to type questions. I'll be looking at the chat box. Maybe we'll address the majority of them at the end, but I'll still be looking throughout, so please ask whenever. So a little bit about CTI. We are an Australian-based company, although I am living in Johannesburg, South Africa. We have people from all 6 continents that we both deliver our courses to, as well as that are employees in the company. CTI has delivered INCOSE SEP exam preparation training to over 2,000 people in the last 10 years. CTI, which is the green company, and you can see the logo in the bottom left-hand corner, we have delivered to over 2,000 people, but under the parenting of PPI, which is the mother company, if you want to call it that, and they have delivered training to 15,000 people, and that's the logo in the top right-hand corner. PPI is more about the systems engineering fundamentals and the nuts and bolts of how to do systems engineering. And so the courses are, of course, the overview of systems engineering, requirements analysis, specification writing, management, and several other courses which you can go and discover on our website if you're interested. Both of PPI and CTI's courses are based on adult learning methods. We have partnered with the Coaching Cafe, which is actually a company here in South Africa who's really helped us to refine the way that we teach to be able to work well with adults so that people can retain and apply the information to their context. And we've been very blessed to work with a host of clients, including Carl Zeiss, Boeing, Nokia, and many others. That's a little bit of introduction about the company. And there we have an overview of our presenters. And we're very blessed to work with some of the leading experts of systems engineering in the world, and they have all sorts of expertise across the life cycle. We have 2 ESEPs as part of the company, which is Michael Gainford and David Mason, and 2 CSEPs and ASEPs as well. So there's a little bit for you to read, but I won't be spending much time talking about each of their backgrounds. Okay, and now to speak about the INCOSE certification, which is what we're all here to discover a little bit more about. So as Kalpesh introduced, and I'm sure that you've discovered from the titles and brackets next to our presenters, there are 3 levels of certification: the entry level, foundation level, and senior level. And with each of those 3 tiers comes different requirements or expectations of what you have to demonstrate in order to get the respective certifications. So for ASEP, one could apply for that if they had years of systems engineering. In a few slides, I'll be going into detail about exactly how one demonstrates that experience, because it is quite specific and it is aligned with the content of the handbook. So ASEP, no necessary experience, no specific educational background. You don't need to demonstrate references, and you do have to pass the knowledge exam. So for both ASEP and CSEP, there's that requirement to have passed the knowledge exam, which is what CTI specializes in training in, is to help prepare people for that knowledge exam, as well as to give them background on how to fill out your references form and get CSEP certified. I'm sure that many people on this phone call would be going straight to CSEP certification, which is when you have 5 years of systems engineering experience. And for that, you need to signify 3 references. So you need to have like either a former employee or someone that you worked with on a project that can vouch for that experience that you will fill in the forms, and I'll show you a little bit about what those forms look like shortly. Again, you have to pass the knowledge exam, and then there's the in systems engineering, or 20 years if you're a CSEP, and then you need to have a technical degree and references. But for this ESEP, you don't have to have the examination. You just are reviewed by an expert panel. So these are the 3 levels of certification that you might consider applying for, and you can start thinking about which one would be applicable to you based on the requirements. So I like to think about what the value is of certification, just so that we know, because it's not an easy thing to achieve, but it helps knowing why you're doing it in the first place. And part of it is that it's a really good way to show people about the knowledge that you have of the systems engineering processes, which can be really good in helping you get a job. If you're applying for a job and there's a set of candidates and the company that you're applying to value systems engineering, it'll be good in discriminating you amongst the rest if you are CSEP or ESEP or ASEP even, and the other people applying for the job or not. And it definitely is an international way to be recognized for your knowledge, and INCOSE is climbing in leaps and bounds in terms of the impact that they're making in the engineering at large space, and including project management. And the interface between systems engineering and project management they're really starting to shake hands at that level, which means we're getting greater exposure. And so this is a really good way to become recognized for the knowledge that you have and for your commitment to engineering, not just systems engineering. But I like to think of systems engineering as a sort of meta engineering, the way to go about it, rather than being a subset of engineering. So those are just some benefits on a personal level. Then for an organization, it's much the same thing, except obviously on an organizational scale. So what we've seen happening quite commonly is that if somebody has put in a proposal for a project to be the supplier for it, we're seeing now that increasingly acquirers are asking that so many engineers be SEP certified, that a certain percentage be SEP certified. So that's becoming quite common. So it's a really good way to level up the organization and to be able to put in a good proposal in place. It's also really helpful when hiring people. It shows it's not so much that it's about competency, but certainly about knowledge. INCOSE also has the competency framework, which is a really good sort of model that one can refer to assess one's competency, but assessing competency is always a challenge. So as a step way to get there, assessing one's knowledge and appreciation of the overall process and developing great language of communication is really, I think, the biggest value of getting SEP certified. And then it also helps you to promote your company and to provide assessment that's done by an external body, so that there's less pressure on you as the organization to assess your staff. Just a little bit of an overview about the application process. So the first thing I would encourage everyone to do, if you're interested in getting certified, which I assume you are, and that's why you're here, is to go to the INCOSE website and to read it. They are constantly updating the information and improving what's there, and it's always relevant and current. So definitely go and read up on it. And then to determine what kind of certification you are interested in, because the process will be a little bit different depending on which direction you want to take. Then consider completing the certification application form, depending on whether you want to get ASEP, CSEP, or ESEP, which is, of course, it's a really big deal to put together that application. But if there are people on this call that would be considering it, then definitely, start as soon as possible, because it does take some time. When you apply to be ASEP or CSEP certified, this is written down in a certain flow of steps, but you actually can take the exam first and then apply for the application later. So you can do it in either order, but sometimes it's easier to just get the application out of the way and then to take the exam. That's totally preference. For ASEP, the application form is like as simple as filling out your name and signing it. It literally takes 30 seconds to sign that, that application form. So if you've passed the exam, you're almost within a couple of days become ASEP certified. Whereas with CSEP, you've got to fill out the reference forms. It does take time. And if you do choose to participate in our workshop, we can definitely help you with that application process, because we have 2 CSEP application reviewers who are part of the CTI team. Then you pay the application fee, you email the form, make sure your references are submitted, and that always takes a bit of time, and sometimes even following up with the references can be a long process, so the sooner you start, the better. And then, yes, you'd get instructions from INCOSE about the exam, and obviously in COVID time, it's a little bit of a different situation regarding how the exam will be taken, and we'll talk about that shortly. And if you do, sometimes the application is not reviewed, but you're welcome to appeal it. So it doesn't mean that the decision is final. There is that opportunity to appeal. And then preparing for the exam before you take it, obviously, we'll talk about that in some detail towards the end of the presentation. Now, we spoke about the somewhat complications of taking the exam now in COVID time. So typically there are 2 ways to take the exam. The one would be in a public place where it's organized by INCOSE. So there's the INCOSE Certification Officer who will coordinate with the INCOSE India chapter and find a good venue and make sure that certain requirements are met. For example, there should be a minimum number of people that writes the exam, something like that. But now those are becoming less common, obviously because of the pandemic, but Prometric centers are available. Prometric is just like a company that allows certain bodies such as INCOSE to register their exam to be taken, and then people can just come book a seat at an exam and take the exam. And there are many Prometric centers that are open throughout India. India actually has like one of the most Prometric centers available in many of the countries I've seen. So I definitely would encourage you, if you're interested, to go and have a look at the Prometric website. They list all the facilities that are open and what their capacity is, and you can definitely contact them. But essentially, the nice thing is about the online exam is that you get your results immediately when you're done with the exam. You don't have to, normally you write the exam and then you give your paper in, and then it has to be sent to INCOSE America, and they will go or INCOSE Central in America, and they will mark it, and then the results come back. It takes a few weeks. So at the computer, it's really great because you find out immediately. And if you don't pass on the first time, which I'm sure that all of you would, especially if you kind of follow the procedures and the steps that we advocate, you can take the exam again, and you're allowed to take 2 re-examinations over 1 year. And you'll get certified, you'll get notified. It was actually, the process is pretty fast from once they mark your exam to getting certified. That can be very quick if your application is all in order. And then the final thing is about the renewal. And this is something where I think a lot of people maybe fall off a little bit, is just maintaining the certification. You need to maintain professional development units, and I'll be going into that a little bit more shortly, in order to stay certified. I think it's only ESEP that you really don't have to maintain with professional development units. And then an important thing to note is if English is not your first language, you can apply for an extended 30 minutes. And I really do advise that you take it if you think that you might need it, because the time goes pretty quickly. It's about 120 questions to answer in 2 hours, and that time, it flies. So I would definitely advise that you apply for the time. If you don't need it, that's fine. You just need to make sure that when you do apply for the time, that it's done before the day of the exam, and you just let Prometric know. Now, these are 14 functional areas that you would need to demonstrate when submitting your CSEP application. They do relate to the content of the handbook, although in a little bit more of a summarized fashion. And you would need to demonstrate competency in these areas in order to get your CSEP application. So I'll just leave that on for a few seconds for you to have a glance over and see the range of topics. Okay, and let's look at how we would actually compile this experience table. So this is what you would submit to go with your CSEP application. So here we have the functional areas on the left-hand column, which we've seen in a previous slide. And what you would basically do is write out, in terms of months, how much of each of these functional areas you exhibited or demonstrated in several positions. So the P1, P2, P3, etc. Those would be positions that you held, or if you worked in different projects, anything where you kind of changed role would justify a different P. And then you'd say the number of months, and the point is that at the end, it should total to at least 5 years worth of experience in those different areas. And if there's a requirement, if you look at the second point here, it says that the requirements, you have to have more than 1 year in at least 3 areas, and then 5 years in total. So 3 areas should have at least 12 months, but then the other areas can add up individually to cover the remaining 2 years. That would add up to 5 years. And yes, please, if you have any questions about this, please type them in the chat box, and we can address them as we go. Okay, so that's just a little bit of animation. Okay, and we spoke about the renewal process, which is very important. Right now, there's about, I think, 3,695 SEPs as of the 4th of September. And that number actually would be a lot higher if people were a little bit more, religious about submitting their renewal and things like that. So if you are ASEP, you need to submit 120 professional development units every 5 years to retain your certification. If you're a CSEP, you need to submit the same amount of points, but every 3 years. And you also need to maintain your INCOSE membership. There is a log form that you can get from the INCOSE website where you can actually track what you do. So for example, attending this kind of a webinar, it will likely count for getting points. Every local event that you go to, awards that you get as part of your job. There's a whole lot of things which I'll show you an example of in the next coming slides. And then there's a renewal form, and thank goodness it's not nearly as hectic as the first CSEP form. It's really just a quick thing to say I'm renewing, and then you email it and sign it, and then INCOSE will let you know that you've been you've been recertified, or that you can maintain your certification. So I'm definitely not going to go over this in detail, but just to give you an idea of the kind of activities that would count towards maintaining your professional certification status. So here is just like participating in technical societies, so conferences, volunteering in STEM activities, doing exams and certifications that are not related to SEP, but anything on a technical society participation level would count, and then it shows you how the points are added and what the maximum is that you can do for one renewal period. You can also then get points for attending, going to courses, or doing a graduate degree, tutorial seminars, writing a book, writing an article. So there's also the coursework and publication aspect. And then there's on the job level, again, it's about the awards that you get, being recognized within the systems engineering environment, volunteering for engineering and science activities. And here's just an example of how one might fill out their log. So if I was considering renewing and I was a CSEP, so I'd have to do this within 3 years, there's how I would put up the log. I would say this is what I did, this is the other amount of units that contribute towards that, and just make sure that at the end it adds up to over 120 for that period of renewal. Okay, so now let's get into the INCOSE Knowledge Exam, which is what you need to complete to get ASEP or CSEP certified. And the first thing that I'll say is that the exam is based entirely on the knowledge or on the content of the Systems Engineering Handbook. And I'm not sure how many of you have this, but mine, you can see, is probably a little bit worse for wear because I refer to it so much. And I definitely advise, if anyone's interested in writing the exam and becoming certified, that you get that handbook. It is extremely valuable, and the hard copy is just so much nicer to work with. And if you are an INCOSE member, you can download a soft copy for free, and then once you are a member, you have the right to print that copy. That's completely fine, as long as you as the person printing it have the membership and you don't print copies for other people. So having the hard copy really makes a difference. And the handbook is predominantly focused on the processes which come from the ISO 15288 Systems Engineering Standard. And the chapters 4 to 8 correlate quite closely with the 15288 standard. You have your technical processes, technical management processes, agreement processes, organizational project enabling processes, tailoring processes. Those are like almost identical to how they're presented in ISO 15288, but then the Systems Engineering Handbook goes a little bit above and beyond with chapters 9 and 10 and talks about cross-cutting methods and the specialty engineering activities. And if you're not familiar with this terminology yet, don't worry. I'll actually explain to you very shortly in how we at CTI like to think about how that information is organized. So altogether, here we have 30 processes that are covered in chapters 4 to 7. We like to think that there are 30 plus 1 processes if you include the tailoring chapter of chapter 8. So quite a few processes that you do need to know very well before you take the exam. But once you start to read the handbook, engage with the material, do some exercises that we would provide to you during the workshop, you start to get into this mindset of how to think and how to interpret and recall the information. So even though it's a lot, this handbook is like 300 pages, you definitely can start to think in the way of this INCOSE view of systems engineering, which makes it a lot easier. So I said I would talk about how we consider the handbook's information to be organized. And you'll see on the top right, it says clarification. In our slides, in our courseware, we use that term every time we are introducing a different view of the content. So, sometimes obviously reading material in a book, it can be two-dimensional, and we try to bring it to life a little bit and help to put it in different contexts so it's easier to remember and apply. So chapter 4 is really what a lot of people consider to be systems engineering. It's the why, the what, and the how in terms of the activities that you do. But then chapter 3 is about the when. How do you time those different activities that are described in chapter 4? Chapter 5 is about how you organize or manage those activities that you've now timed that come from chapter 4. Chapter 6 is about the people who are involved, or what we call the agreement processes, which is about supplier and acquirer. And this can be both on the level of you as a company being the acquirer or the supplier, or from the system to subsystem level, where the system almost acts as the acquirer and the subsystem acts as the supplier. So it's just the necessary understanding that you need to have for the entire life cycle before actually getting involved in the activity. And then chapter 8, tailoring, how rigorously you're going to do systems engineering, which is arguably probably one of the most important aspects, because there is so much content in this handbook, certainly so much that you could do, but it would not be prudent to do all of it to the same degree. It depends on the context that you're dealing with, and that would be determine how rigorously you have to do it, and we definitely explore that a lot in the workshop. And then chapter 7 is about how well. So on an organizational level, you would dictate the quality requirements that you would have to meet for all the activities that you have to do. So this is the way that we like to think of how the material is organized. It's the what, the when, the how, with whom, how rigorously, and how well. Okay, so just diving a little bit into the detail of how the handbook is organized. So for each of the processes that are described in chapters 4 to 7, we have this structure, and it's exactly the same, consistent through all. There's a process overview, which entails the purpose, a description, inputs and outputs, the activities, and then some elaboration. And depending on the process itself, Some of it is just, 1 or 2 pages, and some of it is quite extensive. And this information is mainly presented by way of this IPO diagram. So IPO meaning input, process, and output. And we have the controls and enablers coming from the top and the bottom. The controls will be basically restricting and constraining how we can conduct the activities. And the enablers would be the things that should support the activities that we have to do. So really in the handbook, they describe the controls and enablers very generally. So this comes from figure 1.2 in the handbook. And this image is only shown once exactly like this. Throughout the rest of the processes in the handbook, they only focus on showing the inputs and the outputs, because the controls and the enablers would vary very much depending on the organization itself and so many unique aspects. So listing controls and enablers for every single process would be a little bit cumbersome. But knowing these diagrams for all 30 of the processes from chapters 4 to 7 is very important. And as you can imagine, it can get quite overwhelming to do that, but there are definitely activities that you can do that can help you to pick up on the patterns and on the trends and on how to remember the anomalies of these IPO diagrams. Okay, now a little bit more about the exam. So we've spoken about that you need it for ASEP and CSEP certification. It's 2 hours, and there are 120 multiple choice questions. The questions are all based off of phrases and terminology in the handbook. It's not like a restatement of or synonyms used or anything. The English is never done to confuse you, but what it can sometimes be challenging is that the answers may be taken even from the same section as the correct answer in the handbook, but then you'd have to be extremely clear on the terminology and on those kind of key words in the question. But other than that, it's all done almost phrase by phrase from what's in the handbook. Then in the multiple choice, it might say choose the 2 answers and give you 4 possible options. Choose 1 answer out of 5 possible answers. I'll show you an example of what the questions may look like. There's no penalty for wrong answers, so definitely guess if you find yourself feeling stuck. And the questions are quite difficult. That is for sure. It's not a walk in the park, but that's what makes it all the more worth it to get certified. So just a little bit more of an elaboration. It's not entirely a test of your understanding of systems engineering principles. So even if you really have been doing systems engineering for a long time and you are comfortable and confident with the principles, it doesn't mean that you would be able to pass the exam just off of that alone. Even if you know a lot about the standards, it doesn't mean you'll be able to pass just off of that alone. Again, the handbook is the only source. About 50% of the exam is about how much you can recall specifically from the handbook, and the 50% is about your understanding of the handbook. And that again comes from, like, when they ask a question where both of the answers come from the same section of the handbook, do you really understand the key word that will allow you to distinguish what's the correct and the incorrect answers? And in general, the questions come about from areas where there are bullet points, where there are lists. So, and this is something that we go through during the workshop, and this is why we encourage you to have the handbook, is because we actually, and you'll see that I have like some marking up in my handbook over there. So what we advise is that people bring 2 colors to the workshop. The one is just to draw your attention to information that maybe didn't quite sink in the first time, and you'll need to go and look over it again. And then the other color is like, this is a good candidate for a question. So we really encourage people to get a hard copy, to mark it up, to make use of it, and we show you, in our opinion, what would be good candidates for questions, because obviously if it's multiple choice, it's some like a huge chunk of paragraph may not be the easiest way to test in a multiple choice. Okay, so here's just a sample question, and when you write the exam, you have to sign a form that says you're not allowed to share any of the questions that you got in the exam. So these are just samples. This is definitely not taken exactly from the exam. And this question says, what is the purpose of the project planning process? So is indicates that it's a single answer question. And we usually encourage the following methodology. about answering a question. The first is to identify whether it's a single answer or a multiple answer. So in this question, is means it's single. The second thing is to think about whether there is a throwaway answer. And if you're familiar with the handbook, that part should be pretty easy, is to figure out which is the one that immediately doesn't count. So in this case, it says to keep track of where resources are in the building. I mean, obviously project planning is about much more than the building, so that's a throwaway. Then detractors, and this is about the answers that kind of look right, maybe come from the same part of the handbook, but are there maybe to test your understanding. So for A, to establish the resource needs for a project, well, that's true, but it's probably more than that. And then D is to decide where resources are allocated to which project element, again, probably more than that. So in this case, the C is to produce and coordinate effective and workable plans. And that sentence would have come word for word from the handbook. So the key thing here is recognizing that it's asking for the purpose. And remember, a couple of slides ago, we spoke about how the processes are organized to describe the purpose, the inputs and outputs, the activities, and the elaboration. So the purpose, once you're familiar with the handbook and you can recall what the purpose is, you would see that it's exactly that sentence. But you'd find that the rest of this content, in large part, comes from somewhere in the project planning process, but is not the purpose. It might be part of the activities that are involved. So that's where it can be quite interesting, is that language is key. And here's another example. This time we're talking about 2 inputs. So in your IPO diagrams, these would be found on the input side, 2 inputs of the verification process. So choose 2, we know we have multiple answers. There's a detractor. The verification procedure would be an output of the process, not an input. A throwaway, updated requirements, well, not really. Verification is not there to update requirements. And then, okay, our ability matrix and the integrated system or system elements would be 2 inputs to that process. And again, those will come directly from the IPO diagram. And with practice and the right workshopping, you would definitely be able to recall that with greater ease than, I think, having just read the book. So now, just to talk a little bit about the workshop that is planned from the 12th to the 16th of October, that I really hope that many of you would be able to join. So this is really a 5-day workshop to explore the knowledge exam and the handbook in general. And the aim of it is not that you attend the workshop and then you can immediately go write the exam and pass it. Definitely not. There is always a certain level of revision that you need to do after the course, and that will depend on your prior exposure to systems engineering and your familiarity with the terminology in the handbook and how much you are able to absorb and learn during the class. At the end of the workshop, you'll be able to distinguish between important concepts in the handbook. So, for example, there are many ways that they apply life cycle in the handbook. They talk about life cycle approaches, life cycle stages, life cycle models, and we really dive into detail about what each of those things are that are not necessarily expressed in the most obvious way in the handbook. So there's a little bit, sometimes it's quite, let's say, subtle, and we try to bring that to the forefront. You'll also be able to analyze each of the systems engineering processes. So we pull out certain processes that we do in great detail during the workshop, depending on the, let's say, activation energy that we think it takes to learn them. And we give you a workbook to walk away with and a system to apply in applying that approach to the rest of the processes. But you'll be equipped with the skills to analyze any process, and we'll do many together, but you will then do some on your own in practice, but we definitely pick the most difficult, chunkiest ones to do together in class. Then we'll also teach you, I showed you briefly, but we'll go into much more detail about how to actually answer the questions in the exam, how to identify and follow a process to make sure that you get the correct answer. And we'll also talk to you about how to get the most value from this wonderful handbook that I refer to a lot. I think that there's so much that can be taken from this that can be applied to your real job if you can understand how to do the tailoring and how to extract information from the different processes. And then we trust that you'll be very comfortable to then prepare for the exam in your own time with the learning aids that we give you. So like that clarification chart that I showed with the ellipses, we have so many of those things to help you, to be able to recall all 31 processes off the top of your head. We give you like some acrostics to remember them, a lot of charts and diagrams, and just basically a whole set of tools that you can walk away with to be able to study for the exam and do that little bit of revision on your own. But the workshop will definitely severely reduce the amount of self-study time that you would need without it. So the sessions would run from Monday to Friday of that week from 5:30 p.m. Indian Standard Time. It will be delivered via Zoom, much like this session, and you don't need to have a paid account. The way that it would go is that we start at 5:30 p.m. First session ends at 7 p.m. Then there's a 30-minute break, and then we do our second session from 7:30 to 9 p.m. In general, the way that the workshop will work, and I'll show you a little bit of detail about exactly what topics we'll cover and which workshops we'll do, but there will be a bit of presentation, a group workshop that we'll do in breakout rooms, and then quiz questions, and there will be a lot of practice quiz questions that will give you, again, like sort of model questions that, you know, you could potentially get in the exam, so you'll get a lot of practice throughout the course on quiz questions you could get, and then also a lot of discussion. Again, this comes from the adult learning approach of socializing ideas so that you can retain them. And yeah, all the materials you'll be getting the week before the event, you'll get them in digital form. And then again, we really encourage you to have the hard copy of the handbook. It'll make things a lot easier. Just to speak a little bit about the technical requirements. So having a laptop screen of about 14 inches will be valuable. Sometimes we'll be sharing 2 documents side by side, so it won't always have this size of, because now I'm sharing from PowerPoint in full screen mode. So the bigger the screen, the better. And if you have 2 screens, even better, but at least having a 14-inch screen is important. And then having a bandwidth of 10 megabits per second is good for the video transmission, and so we can connect with each other. A microphone, we need to be able to hear you, and a camera is great. Obviously now most of you don't have your cameras on, and that's perfectly fine, but in the workshop, if we can see each other and read each other's faces, that will be best for the learning. And then the hard copy, of course, and then a quiet space to work, and of course a good attitude and a thirst for learning. So what happens is that the week before, on the 7th of October, we'll do like a 60-minute pre-meeting, which is just where we'll come together and just introduce ourselves, and I'll talk you through the kind of controls that you would make use of during the class. We'll do a practice breakout room as well, so we can just see how that will work. I'll do an example quiz question to just make sure that all the technical aspects are covered. And then there might also be some pre-reading that I would assign to you so that we can really hit the ground running on the first day, because the workshop altogether is only 15 hours, when typically our full course takes about 24 to 26 hours. So we really try to make the most of people's time, make it something that you can just do in the evening but get great value of, and not have to take time off of work in order to really accelerate your knowledge of the handbook. And as part of the workshop, again, you'll get the courseware, which the slides look pretty much like this, and you'll get the workbook. So the workbook has all the exercises that we've described for how you can test the different processes and work. If you can work with someone in a group, it's the best way to study. So we definitely advise pairing off after the course, or even if you do it on your own, having that workbook to actually guide you through the processes is very valuable. We'll then give you a 200 exam question set. So this again is a sample questions that you can expect to be similar to the exam, so that you can assess where you are. And there are actually several smaller tests within those questions, so you can see where you are and then go back and do it again and then assess. And then we give you like a scoring system of, we say, okay, if you get more than 12 out of 20, we think that you are ready for the exam. So we'll also give you those metrics that you can use for self-assessment. And then you also have the support of us, coming to us, asking us about the application. If you have any questions for the exam, it's also part of the value of the workshop. So how will this actually help you get your ASEP or CSEP? So the sound principles of adult learning really will help you to retain the information by drawing on your past experiences, interacting with people in a group, and applying the theory to practical scenarios. And then working with people who have been deeply involved in all the aspects of the life cycle of systems engineering, and who also have been involved in seeing many people get certified. Having the learning aids, the workbook and the practice questions is of course very helpful, and post-course support, we're here to answer any questions. So all these factors together will hopefully make certification a lot more or achievable in a shorter space of time, I think is the right way to go about it. And here is just a little bit more detail about the adult learning approach. So we use a lot of games. We do something called chunking, where we bring concepts together and make them palatable to understand. Mistakes are encouraged. There's a lot of recapping. We really try to open up discussion and really make sure that we can pick up on the subtleties of the handbook. So all of these principles are embedded in our learning that thankfully Coaching Cafe worked with us to make sure that it's appropriate for adults learning quite an in-depth, extensive amount of information in a short period of time so that they can apply it to their own scenarios. And I just wanted to show you a quick example of how we might relay a concept to you to make it easier to understand. So one of the things that they talk about in the handbook is characteristics of a requirement and characteristics of a set of requirements, and then they talk about attributes of a requirement. And if you've been deeply involved in requirements management or spec writing, these terms, you might easily be able to distinguish between them. But sometimes it can be a little bit subtle. It can also be maybe a little bit confusing when it comes to an exam time to figure out which are which. So the way that we summarize these is we think about characteristics as relating to the quality of expression. So how well are you writing the actual requirement? So now if you go back to this list and you look at the characteristics, you'll see that of management. So, you know, I'm sure some of these terms, sort of trace to parent, trace to source, they are things that you might see in a requirement management tool. So attributes is to do with quality of management, characteristics is to do with quality of expression. And again, we've got that clarification term on the slide to show you that this figure does not come from the handbook. This is just something that CTI has put together to help you understand the material. So the implication of that means that you can have very poorly written requirements, but you can be managing them really well. Or that you can have really well written requirements, but you can be managing them really poorly. And of course, the win-win is to have well-written requirements managed really well, to the extent that the system resources can afford. And now I'll be diving into, just briefly, I know that our time is coming up, so I'll open up to questions. Yeah, okay, great. Yes, please do ask questions. Thank you for the question. Okay, so now I will just go through an overview. So there'll be some pre-reading, especially on chapters 1 and 2. Chapters 1 and 2 in the handbook mainly talk about terminology and placing the handbook in context. So there'll be pre-reading on that, and then we'll kind of kick off the day summarizing what was in the pre-reading and talk about what is a system in a larger context, as well as to do some quiz questions. Then in the second session, we'll go over chapter 3, which is the how, which is the when, the timing of the systems engineering activities, and we'll do another workshop there. On day 2, we'll dive deeply into chapter 4. Chapter 4 is the biggest chapter in the handbook, and certainly there's a lot of good content there, and we'll go into many of the processes. There'll be lots of good workshop activity to do, lots of discussion, and of course quiz questions. Then on day 3, we'll be focusing mainly on finishing chapter 4 and diving into chapter 5. Chapter 5 is again the management activities, and we'll have a lot of workshop, presentation, and quiz questions to make sure that you really understand the gist of the chapter, and then also that you are able to do any revision on your own very easily. On day 4, we'll finish chapter 5, we'll do chapter 6, and then in the evening, we'll do chapter 7, And so what we'll do is we'll also present to you like a learning chart to show you the emphasis of the content. So you'll notice that in some parts will be a little bit haste because we're like, this is something you can just read on your own and understand very easily, whereas this is something where you should really dive deeply into because it provides context for the rest of the scenario. And then we'll finish off with chapters 8, 9, and 10 all together on day 5. And the reason why this is done pretty quickly is because first there's the bigger concepts that we'll discuss, and then there's a lot of detail in the book about like application areas, which really is something that you can read on your own. And a lot of the time there aren't necessarily a lot of let's say there's not necessarily a lot of scope for good exam questions from those areas in any case. So we'll definitely have significant experience in systems engineering themselves. If they are already CSEP, if they are already ESEP, that's great, but they don't have to be. If they have had a long career in systems engineering, or if they are, are of significant stature within the project or within the company, then that would be important. But it's mainly about in order for them to refer you in systems engineering, they themselves need to have some level of expertise. But no requirements as far as that they have to be INCOSE SEP certified or something like that. Okay, the next question from, thank you Aditya for that question, by the way. Mohammed, how much is the minimum percentage required to clear the exam? What about the examination center? Very clever. They don't share what that pass mark is. Nobody knows. Okay, maybe somebody knows, but not many people know. I think only just 1 or 2 people within INCOSE know. You need to basically, demonstrate a certain level of knowledge, and we don't know what that pass mark is. But what I should also tell you is that in that question set of 120 questions, not all of the questions will count for marks. So actually 100 questions count for marks. 20 questions are thrown in there for them to assess the quality of the question. So they are always introducing new questions. So 100 questions will count for marks, 20 are them using as a test. So, and they're going to gauge, okay, how many people got this question right? If whatever their metric is, if the right amount of people got it right, then they'll include it. If like nobody gets it right, maybe it was too hard or unclear. If everybody gets it right, maybe it's too easy. So nobody knows about that percentage, but I promise you, if you get what's in the handbook, if you're in with the terminology, you will pass. What about the examination center? Can we take it from any Prometric center? So when you go to the Prometric website and you have a look at the listed centers, like when you go into prometric.com, there'll be something that says like COVID update. You click on that, and then it will show you a list of all the centers that are now reopened and to what capacity. If you just find the center that is closest to you, my understanding is that most of them in India offer this exam. So just find out about availability and when is the date that you can book. And it would be quite good timing to book your exam within 2 to 6 weeks after the workshop. So really, you could get certified before the end of the year. Within 2 to 6 weeks, 2 being like on the very shorter side and 6 weeks being like the maximum, so you'd still retain information. That would be pretty good. And yeah, so just find out from the Prometric center near you. But my understanding is that most of the centers in India offer this exam. So Aditya said, to add to my previous question, how many months and years should 3 references know the candidate in the project? So it depends, and maybe let me see if I can just scroll here. Sorry if I'm making you dizzy. Okay. So as long as that for a minimum of 3 areas, you stayed in that one role for 1 year, and that you've got at least one person who can vouch for your 1 year commitment in those 3 areas, you'll be fine. And if the other areas in the other, so let's just say you only were working with someone for 3 months in a certain role, or that you only did requirements engineering for 5 months, that's fine. But for at least 3 areas, you need to have someone who can vouch for at least 1 year of your commitment in that area. And I mean, it doesn't need to be like full-time commitment, just consistency over that 1 year. So if you're working on multiple projects, in the one project you're involved in integration, in the other project you're working in acquisition and supply and risk and opportunity management, that's fine. It doesn't need to be your full-time commitment in just one area, as long as there's someone who can vouch that for a year's time you are committed to that, if that makes sense. Okay, so if there are any remaining questions, please do feel free to ask. What is the cost of the training program? Okay, so this workshop will be 9,998 rupees, and we've chosen that price because we really want to extend our business within the Indian region. Typically our courses are a lot more than that, but we understand that it's not always possible to pay that, and we hope that, you know, some people will be sponsoring themselves for the course, and we hope that they would experience tremendous value and appreciation for the material that we'll learn. So we try to give you way more than what you pay for, but yeah, 9,998 rupees. I'll go to my my email details again. Sorry for making you dizzy. My colleagues always complain when I do that. Okay, let me just share my screen again. Current slide. Okay, I'll share my screen here. Please do take down my details if you have any questions that you'd like to ask, and send me an email. I'd love to hear from you, and I can answer anything else that you had in mind. We're going to publicize this workshop by Thursday of this week. So on Thursday, you can head to our website, which is this www.certificationtradingint.com, and you can register for the course over there. But yeah, we're testing the waters. We want to do something cool. We want to engage with other parts of the world. I absolutely love India, so I love working with people from India. So I would love to get to see many of you on the workshop and to hopefully be involved in your certification journey. Please do let me know if you have any questions. Feel free to email me or find me on LinkedIn or even WhatsApp me. That will be perfectly fine. Okay. Oh, my pleasure, Aditya. Cool. We'll be getting a recording of the session, or the slide set used in the session. So this will be recorded, and I think Stuti said that this will be available on the INCOSE India YouTube channel, but she can clarify that. And I will definitely make these slides available to you. I'll get them to Stuti, who I'm sure will be able to send them maybe on the INCOSE India LinkedIn page. She'll answer that. Stuti, do you want to speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, so we are recording this session, and just like all our other webinars, if you go to YouTube, INCOSE channel, and in that we have a separate playlist for INCOSE India webinars. So you should find this soon over there. It takes a couple of days to upload it. So within a few days, it would be available to you.
Thank you. Thank you. That's great. Okay. Well, like I said, I would be so happy to answer any questions you have. So reach out to me in whatever way that you can and want to, and I'll answer those questions. But really, thank you guys so much for your time. I appreciate you staying here in the evening, and I really hope to see some of you in our workshop next month. Thank you very much.
Yeah, and thanks, Rene. Before we close, I just have one query. So those who are interested in joining workshop, uh, are they required to come with some self-preparation or the homework, uh, like what you suggest?
Yes, thanks for the question. So the week before, on the 7th of October, we'll be doing a 60-minute kind of an overview. So what you get is straight after that 1 hour talk, we send you all the material. And really the preparation is mainly reading through the first couple of slides of the courseware, or if you have the handbook, doing that. And we will tell you exactly what you need to do. But all of this can be done within an hour or two. We'll give you
Right.
that homework in that first session on the 7th of October.
That's good. So with this, I believe we are done with most of the queries, and people have you also shared your contacts with them. I would just request everyone who is on this webinar, who are attended this session, if they have any further queries, they can definitely uh, contact you, as well as if they want to direct any queries to INCOSE, uh, they can ask us. Definitely your presentation you are going to share to us, and we'll make it available to everyone. And as Stuti said earlier, we are going to put this recording onto the YouTube channel that would be possibly will be available within a week or so, and the notification would be there in a YouTube channel for the INCOSE India. So people who want to see, they can always subscribe it and they can get the notification against it. I really want to thank you, Rene, for sharing this valuable information with us and making things simpler, because most of the people are interested in having a certification, but they don't know how to start with. So this, I definitely see that this would be helpful for almost everyone who are looking for certification information and they were not able to find that, or not able to get everything in a streamlined way. Let's see, it would be helpful to others, and as it is recorded, it will be helpful in future as well. uh, with
Right.
this, I would like to conclude, and please share your thoughts if you have any.
Thanks so much. Yeah, I really hope that this will be helpful, and I'm glad this is going to go on YouTube so that people can watch it at a later stage. And yeah, just it would be great to see more people SEP certified. Already about 10% of SEPs come from the Asia Oceania region. So you guys already do quite well, and let's see if we can get that number even higher.
Sure. Sure. Yeah. So with this, I would like to conclude the webinar, and again, I would like to thanks everyone, especially Rene, for keeping aside time and sharing this information with us. Thank you.
Thank you. This was great. See you soon.
See you soon.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rene. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thanks, Kalpesh.
Thank you.